Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm here once again with co pilot Cassie. Hi, Cassie.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Good to be back.
So happy. So, today we're going to do something, I guess, not so different. We're going to do our first Q&A. We're going to do our first Q&A episode. This is something that we want to start doing monthly. So we would love our audience members to submit questions that we could answer during these episodes, and we have some today, and we're going to go over them. And the theme is going to be around prioritizing healthy eating habits, just prioritizing just staying sane with your eating in a busy world. Because we know a lot of the women that I work with that listen to this podcast have so much going on, lots of responsibility, lots of different balls up in the air. And so we're going to talk about some ways that we can just maintain sanity, keep that priority top of mind, and we're going to answer some questions. So I guess we'll just start with the first question that I got. How does that sound?
I love it. Let's jump into it.
Awesome. Okay, so the first question that I got was from someone named Lillian. And I'm going to read the question. It was kind of long, but that's okay. Hi, Alana. I've been following your account and listening to all of your podcasts all the way from South Africa. Amazing. Your content has been such a big part of my healing process. So, firstly, thank you for that. You mentioned the other day that if anyone has questions, they can send them through. So, I thought I would give it a try. Perfect. That's exactly what we want, right, Cassie?
You're doing it. I love it.
What I am struggling with is creating an environment where my nervous system can be regulated properly. I recently accepted a promotion and work in a high performance team with a lot of men, where there is inevitably a lot of pressure. And at home, I'm a mom to two boys aged 4 and 6. While I try to incorporate bite sized self care routines throughout the day, I still don't find that to be enough for me to be able to function with a calm nervous system. Honestly, a lot of my life is also just rushing from one thing to the next and hoping to not be late. But I am ambitious and driven, so I do enjoy my job a lot, even though it does cause anxiety to some extent. So, my question is, do you have any additional tips for how to create the right environment to be able to live life with a calm nervous system, even for someone who operates in an environment like I do? I know you advise many other successful career women, so there must be a way to navigate this.
Great question. It's a really great
Yeah.
question.
What are your thoughts on that question?
Well, honestly, when you were reading it to me, I thought, and you touched about this a little bit, I think in our previous episode together, is that kind of concept of the masculine and feminine energies. And I can see that kind of evident in this person's like work life balance is they have this kind of really charged masculine career. They kind of mentioned that they have a lot of men in their job. They're really ambitious. A lot of really great qualities that kind of fall into that like masculine energy. And at home, it seems like they're kind of struggling to have that I don't know, softness for lack of better words, or maybe like that soft place to land, which I suppose kind of leans into the feminine energy. And so that's really kind of what stuck out to me. In what they were saying. So definitely finding that balance between the two of them, I think would be really beneficial.
Yeah, that's such a good point, actually. And I think something that's missed in in the masculine feminine energy conversation is that being a mother, even though you're a mother, it's very masculine in its energy. You're taking care of someone else's needs. You're taking care of someone else. You're putting them first, and especially as a mother, that mothering type of energy
Mhm.
in an energetic in the definition of an energetic dynamic
Mhm.
is very masculine because it's doing,
Yeah, it's like an
it's
activator
providing,
role.
it's
Mhm.
providing, it's protecting. And by nature, masculine energy is provider protector. On the other hand, pregnancy, being pregnant is very feminine.
Mhm.
Do you see?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really interesting for people to understand that when you have a very high performance job and you're a mom, you are in your masculine energy 24/7. And so I think that this question, so it sounds like she really likes her job. She likes being in her masculine energy at work. And it
Yeah.
might be that it's in her personal life that she needs to change her, that she needs to adapt her environment, not change, but she needs to adapt her environment. And she said, um, do you have any additional tips for how to create the right environment to be able to live with life with a calm nervous system, even for someone who operates in an environment like I do? I think the important thing to reiterate here is that she said, I enjoy my job a lot, even though it causes anxiety to some extent. So I think that the opportunity for her here is to cultivate the skills of communication and connecting to her core values and needs in her personal life, so
Mhm.
that she could get support there and be more in her feminine energy there,
Mhm. Yeah.
and be able to then find that nervous system balance there. Obviously, like, she might need to create some boundaries at work or some other things like that, but I think that oftentimes, and this is where a lot of the women I work with also struggle, is that their masculine energy leaks into their personal life. And it's less about changing that and more about building another container side by side
Mhm.
that they can vacillate between.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think that creating that strong, you know, opposing side, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like dichotomy, is that feminine energy will then fuel your masculine energy. It's not that this kind of that your work is necessarily draining you. You really enjoy it. Or it's not necessarily that you're like, I don't want to do my work, or I'm feeling a lot of dread around having or doing any of my work. It's that I want to feel content with both sides, and I think that cultivating that home life, that feminine energy in your home life, will actually help charge the thing that you enjoy doing, that career that you built that you really enjoy. And I completely agree that there can still be those separate containers that work in you know in synergy to charge both elements.
100%. And that's what it really is about, right? It's about developing another element. It's not about changing an element.
Yeah, or taking away, or like trying to minimize the feminine or minimize the masculine. It's boosting
Right.
it up to have like it's boosting up whatever is, like, for lack of better words, lacking at the moment, to kind of fill the cup, for sure.
Exactly. And I think for Lillian specifically, I think that connecting to what her values are personally and recognizing they might, and her needs personally, that they might be separate than her values and needs out professionally, and then creating the conditions and the communication and um, I guess, the framework that she needs to get those needs met and build out that element of her life. I
Hmm.
think that she'll find that her nervous system relaxes,
Hmm.
which is what she's looking for. And that's a lot of what I teach women to do in both my course, Decoding Permanent Weight Loss, and the Emotional Eating Solution, because the women who work with me know this, and who listen know this, that so much of this is not about food. It's about these skills
Hmm.
and learning how to create that harmony in your life so that your environment conditions support your goals, your weight goals, your eating habit goals, your nervous system uh, goals as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say separating the thing that, or the idea that you don't want to, or sorry, separating the idea that you need to change or minimize the masculine role or minimize your work life, and it's really that you need to beef up the alternative side. Just so I'm getting it straight, like in the short answer, you know what
Exactly.
I mean, for sure.
Exactly. It's less about having to change something and fix. And I think that's a big theme too. Oftentimes
Yeah.
we think we have to change and fix and all these things, when really it's just about readjusting and potentially growing something else that we haven't grown yet, right? It's that abundance, right? It's that abundance mindset. It's like, it's not, we don't have to fit something into a small thing and have to make all these cuts. We just
Mhm.
have and make all these edits or cut things out. We have to just learn how to grow our capacity and have more, but
Yeah.
just have boundaries, communicate, all these things.
I think that's a great point for Lillian's question specifically, is the fact that that might be the shift for her, is the fact that it's not about taking away, and it's not about like I need to change, or I need to, or I shouldn't say change, but it's not that I need to cut out or make these cuts, kind of like you were saying. It's just more so the small adjustments and the reframing of how you're looking at these things, instead of being like, I'm not doing it right, I'm not change, like I'm, and so I think that's limiting belief of being like, I need to cut things out, I need to change, when in reality you have those things. It's just those adjustments and kind of where you're placing them.
Yes, for sure. And also recognizing that it's a new skill that she might have to develop.
Mm-hmm.
As accomplished and as ambitious and as skilled as she is in her work and being a mother and all those things, it's a different skill to grow your feminine energy.
Mm-hmm. But
It
it's a
is an
skill she
actual
already
skill.
possesses. It just needs to be like, it's like learning to ride a bike. You know how to learn, like when you're driving with three wheels, like you're doing the motion, you're doing the thing. But once you take the training wheels off, you're like, this feels like a totally new thing, but you're doing the same things. It's just like replaced. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, that's exactly also, I think, to the next point about like the importance of feedback
Hmm.
and what I like to call going into the wild when you're learning new
I
skills.
love that phrase. It's just too good.
Right. Because it's like we can, if I were coaching Lillian and I would give her all of these direct coaching prompts for her life, right? I'd be like, okay, so these are some directives of how to build the skill of feminine energy
Hmm.
based on knowing her and her life and all these things. But at the end of the day, information, she has to synthesize that, and it will only synthesize by what I like, exactly what I say, taking it out into the wild and practicing it in her real life, in her real relationships, in her, and actually then getting feedback
Hmm.
back, and to your point about the bike, it's like you take the training wheel off and then you're on two wheels now, and then it's shaky and then you fall. When you fall off the bike and you scrape your knee, you can see that two ways. You could be like, oh my god, I suck, I failed at bike riding. Or you could say, oh, what can I learn from what I did there, and adjust and get feedback and hop on the bike again, practice again, and do little tweaks here and there to then be in balance and continue to go forward.
Hmm.
And that's exactly what this is, actually, right? It's like, here, I'll give you some directives, you practice, you get feedback, and then, you know, you go out again, you iterate.
And as immersive as that experience sounds, like I'm sure that it also sounds like there's an element of not detachment in a way, but for lack of better words, detachment in a way, because of that, like idea that if you fail, it's not square one, or fail, it's not like we undid all of the doing. Because I think, myself included, when I think about integrating a new practice for growth in my life, I think like if I fall off the bike, I wasn't doing it right to begin with, and I need to go way back to the theories of it all, and I'm not ready for integrating it and taking it into the wild, that sort of thing. And so when I say detachment, it sounds like there's an element of detachment involved, where you have to be like, oh, it's not not personal. Like it's not the end of the world if I fail. Like it just means that I need to get back on the bike. I don't need to go back to the house and get a new bike. It's
Yeah.
and you know what I mean? So there's a little bit of, distance that you need to have of being like, no, this doesn't need to hit this crazy catastrophic end for me to get, to feel like I'm ready to get back on the bike.
100%. And I think I like to call it disentanglement, not so much
I like
attachment.
that. No, I really like that.
Yeah, it's like similar to when something is like you have piece of thread that end up being tangled. You don't just throw the thread out, you try to disentangle the thread. So the assumption or the theory is that you're still engaged, but you're not entangled.
Hmm.
And it's not
Yeah.
as black and white, right? So disentanglement is you have that certain um, distance that you described, and you don't take it so personally, right? So it's like you said, it's like everything is like imperfect and impersonal. And there's
Hmm.
another one that I'm forgetting right now that I have in my course somewhere. But it's like, and that's really what you want to remember about it. And I think that when you want to change things on a nervous system level, or you want to change behaviors, which seem like habits, and they're typically then unconscious or subconscious, you have to be able to have some sort of ability to disentangle from the results.
To continue with our metaphor, I'm thinking it's one of those things where you have to look at riding a bike as its own separate entity. It's not Cassie and her, just for for to give you kind of like a people reference. It's like it's not Cassie being wrong. It's just the Cassie can't ride her bike yet. She's not good at riding her bike yet. It's not like you have to detach yourself from it and you're like, the bike riding skill that I have or the bike riding skill that I'm trying to become good at or become fluent in, um,
Hmm.
is it's not about the fact that I'm never going to be able to be good at it or the fact that I'm never going to do it. It's the fact that I'm not good yet. Like I'm practicing it and I'm bringing it, like you said, out into the wild and actually doing the thing. And so it doesn't mean that when I fail, it inherently is a problem with me. It's that we haven't, like, this is my first time doing it. This is my first time getting out there.
Right. And the thing is, it's not failure, like it's
Right.
feedback.
Feedback, yeah, exactly. That's a perfect, I think, word for it to reframe, like that it's not failure.
Yeah. Right. It's not failure, it's feedback. And you can apply that to this question when you want to change your environment, right? How can I change my environment to calm my nervous system? I mean, that means that you have to change behavior.
Mhm.
And behavior change means that you're probably going to have to feel certain things that maybe you're not feeling right now, right? You're only feeling the end of it, which is anxiety or which is contraction or whatever triggered her to ask that question to begin with. That's what she's feeling. But in order to change the behavior, she's going to have to take a microscope to some of the things that potentially you're not seeing in the behavior, and you have to feel some things and make subtle changes to some things that require new skills, right? Like
Mhm.
new conversational skills, new boundaries, new ways of behaving with people that might feel very out of your comfort zone. And you're going to have to learn how to be with that new information that is born out of experience, right? It's really different when someone tells you how it's going to be, and they are like, and so it's going to be like this, then this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Then when you go out in the wild yourself and you actually get the information in your own cells and your own experiential information, the validated experience, the validated faith, very different. And yeah, and like that is much more nuanced. That's much more colored.
Mhm.
And that's not going to be black and white. That's not going to be right or wrong. That's going to be, you're going to have to look at it in a new lens.
Mhm. So, when somebody is ready kind of to take this out into the wild, what is a circumstance that you would say that people would be looking out for? Like, is there a specific like instance that you find that people have their first encounter where they're like, "Whoa, hold on! Like, this is like this is that experience where I'm taking it into the wild."
Yeah, so I think that with changing your eating habits, especially as an emotional eater, we were giving this example in relation to someone wanting to change their environment, but I think it's the same thing with emotional eating. I will give people directives on how to behave with food per se to change their compulsive eating habits while also not feeling like they're on a diet or restricted.
Hmm.
And I'll give specific directives for that.
Hmm.
And then you try it. Okay. And then you recognize, and then you get feedback from that, and you realize that it's like, oh, wow, I feel way more urgency to continue eating this.
Hmm.
Right. And I've said to, and I'll say, um, I could say to you, you might feel that way. Right. Like you might feel that way. And they feel that way. And let's say they continue eating anyway.
Hmm.
You could say, oh, that's a failure. But it's not a failure because you remembered that I said that you would say that. You recognize now that you maybe continue to eat with compulsion. You've clocked that.
Hmm. You've planted
So
that seed.
now that, right. So now that's feedback, right? And so the next time you go out into the wild and you do it, you do the thing. The hope is that you learned, you took the experience that you had before, which was, potentially um, disappointment that you necessarily didn't quote unquote succeed in it that time. And you remember that didn't feel very good because you have a goal,
Hmm.
right? So I always tell people just remember that you have a goal. And that's what's motivating you to take these new actions and the new behaviors. It's why you're going to take these new directives, you're going to apply them. And even if you didn't do them to their full capacity, take responsibility for what happened, recognize that you're disappointed. So I think there's a an inflection period when something didn't go right to either be a victim or be empowered. So say you had a directive, you had a new skill that I had told you to do and you didn't do it. You tried, it didn't happen. You can either be a victim and say like, "Oh, I'm a failure. This is never going to work. This doesn't work." Or you could say, "I didn't do it. It feels really sucky. I really want to change. And so I'm looking forward to the next opportunity that I can apply this new skill again and
Hmm.
do it differently."
It's almost regenerative instead of.
Exactly.
Mhm. I love that
Exactly.
example too because it shows that it starts seemingly small. You know what I mean? It's not like you're making it starts with making smaller changes of being attuned into in this example attuned into your feelings when you're eating, when you're having this urge to overeat or something along those lines. I think it's those because that's like the tip of the iceberg. Once you start to do that and you kind of have these experience with these behaviors, you're kind of like that's the thing that kind of like starts me down that landslide if things go poorly, for me or in that experience. But being attuned into your emotion is the first is being in the wild with it, being attuned to being like that's how I felt about it, being attuned to being like I don't have to feel like that after the fact, or I'm now aware of how I'm feeling after the fact is those changes. It's not like I'm going into the wild and I'm slaying the beast. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And to the other point, so that's one side, but the other side is if you do the skill correctly and you don't overeat, it's easy to then feel like you're on a diet.
Mm.
It's easy to then be like, "Oh, I'm putting restrictions on myself." And that's another side where when you're trying to change your behavior with overeating, or you actually do want to lose weight, in which case you have to adapt and adjust maybe some of the ways you're eating, taking that into the wild also means potentially feeling like you are on a diet
Mhm.
and you are restricting. But again, the inflection place here is you could be a victim and say, "Oh, I'm restricting. This is a diet." Or
Mhm.
you could say, "I'm I'm empowering myself to make boundaried decisions." And it feels a little weird. I am feeling that sense of incompletion. I am feeling that sense um uh of wanting more, or of like that kind of urgency that has been my habit for a long time that I haven't been paying attention to. I only paid attention to it after that I ate the whole bag of chips and was like, "Oh, I feel like crap." But now you're in it with your moment to moment experience, which when you begin the journey of seeing how the sausage is made for your behavior, essentially,
Yeah.
it's very unnerving psychologically, and actually nervy for your nervous system. And so you're going to feel your nervous system on height when you first start seeing how the sausage is made for your behaviors.
Mhm.
But that's the only way that you're going to change them.
Mhm.
And I think that it's like you said, even when we go back to the bike metaphor, which you'll probably sick over at this point, but you can't just visualize yourself into riding a bike. You can't be like on training wheel and then like, if I visualize myself, I'm going to get on a bike and it's going to be great. Like you're going to
Mhm.
fall off the bike. Like it's going to be wobbly. It's going to not be great. You're going to feel every twist and turn and like side to side, and your nervous system is going to be on high alert until you keep getting on the bike, you do it enough, you get comfortable with the feedback, you integrate and synthesize the feedback from a place of self-worth and empowerment, and that's how you become smooth with the bike.
Yeah, it's using those points of discomfort that you'll only find when you're in the wild. When going back to kind of what you were referencing in the sense that um, the heightened nervous system. What specific points are causing these, nervous system flare ups, for lack of better words, where you're feeling that resistance, where you're feeling that discomfort, and taking that back and being like, oh, like it's almost like a beacon or a parameter. You know what I mean? You're like, oh,
Mhm.
that's that exact point where I'm like, oh, that feels unsettling to me. That feels not great to me. And then you can kind of like take it back to base camp and be like, okay, well, like how are we going to adjust next time? How are we going to, like make it so we don't hit that electric fence metaphorically and physically?
Yeah, or maybe it's just something that you just have to deal with. Right? Like
Yeah.
even with, like with emotional eating and like changing behaviors with food, like those initial sensations of like, oh, I feel like I'm incomplete. That's just something you just gotta get used to. And eventually that will change into not feeling that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I 100% guarantee. But you have to like get through that initial piece of it. And, and if you, and on the other side, if you do end up overeating and you do end up feeling disappointed, you have to push through. Push is like an aggressive word, but you have to kind of move through that feeling of, oh my God, this is never going to work for me. I'm not going to succeed. Like I'm never going to succeed at this. You really have to take the opportunity to see that as, okay, what skill did I not implore here?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a lot of times it's because people are worried about feeling incomplete. A lot of times these sides of the coins speak to each other. A lot of times there is an underneath worry that people are like, oh, well, if I stop reading, I'm going to feel incomplete. And then there's some mindset stuff that is a lot of times happening there.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time that we try something and we practice it, we get feedback, and we can only get that feedback that's going to sharpen our edges, and that's going to, sharpen the diamond. Look, a diamond becomes a diamond under pressure. Doesn't become a diamond because it sits there.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect. It's so interesting hearing this too. It's because it translates I mean, goes full circle, exactly how we started this episode with that the question from Lillian. It's um, these are versatile skills, you know what I mean. It could be as niche as, emotional eating, but it could also go back to the wide scale thought of work-life balance, but I completely agree, sharpening that skill doesn't mean that you don't already possess the skill. It's just a matter of sharpening that weapon for it might be a little aggressive in the metaphor, but like sharpening that skill and sharpening those like you said, a diamond, because it's not going to happen unless you put it under a little bit of pressure and a little bit of discomfort, and knowing that the world and life in general has discomfort built into it,
Hmm.
and so when we lean into that a little bit, we're able to kind of push our boundaries and make things a little bit easier on ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, discomfort, the more discomfort we can hold, and the more that we know our own edges and boundaries, that's how we live a life that's full and that never feels out of our control. And so that's the thing. Like, you don't feel in control by eliminating stuff in your life. You feel in control by including more things in your life with a greater sense of your own understanding of your own edges, your own boundaries, your own needs, values, communication ability. Um, it's just those are the skills, and you sharpen them through living, not through theory. You sharpen them through living and through failing at doing it at first, and seeing the failure as feedback, and then iterating and continuing to do that until it's, feels as smooth as riding a bike on two wheels once you know how to do
Mhm, and then
it.
you're cruising.
Oh yeah.
No, I love it. I feel like we could, like, every time we have a conversation like this, I feel like we could talk for forever. I mean, there's so much to say on it too. So,
I know. So true. I love it. Any other questions that you have? I know sometimes we have conversations and chat, and so just curious if there's anything else on the docket.
I mean, I think we talked a little bit about, I mean, personally, like I'm, case in point, I have ingested quite a bit of material to help shape my life. But I often find myself reverting back to kind of reflexive, for lack of better words, reactions in the heat of the moment. Do you have maybe any takeaway advice for someone who might be struggling to put their new knowledge to the test? Their training wheels, for lack of better words, if they're starting
Yeah.
to kind of
Yeah, I
transition.
mean, I would love like to do a little mini hot seat with you if you want to share some of your like a little bit of what you mean, and maybe I
Yeah,
can give you some pointed
yeah, for
advice.
sure. Give me a second to think. Like what I'm like thinking about, like what asset of my life to share. So
Well,
let's
yeah, because like what reflexive behaviors do you find? Do you find it's like in relationships? Do you find that it's in your eating habits? Do you find that it's like with friends? Because believe it or not, a lot of the women that I work with, it's not always romantic relationships. It's like friendships and things like that where um, people feel like their nervous system gets a little off, or they're not sure how to find that feminine energy, like through friendships or like through feeling nurtured
Mhm.
um, interdependently.
Right. I think maybe, I mean, this is just a blanket relationship thing because I find it to be like a through line in both romantic, personal, and even work relationships for me. But I'm somebody who, if I'm met with resistance, especially a very like set in their ways type of resistance, then I will be like, no worries, let's go around what you prefer. So let's say, for example, I think a really good example might be, just because we were talking about work life earlier,
Uh-huh.
is like I'm very much like this in work. I have my own opinions, and I definitely would consider myself to be someone who is opinionated, and I like to fight for those opinions in theory. But oftentimes when I'm kind of expressing, say, I'm somebody who works in a creative role, as we all know. So let's say for when I'm trying to express a creative thought to somebody, and they're like, no, we want to do it like this. Oftentimes I'm the first to kind of back up and be like, no, actually, I that's fine. Like, you're totally right. You know what I mean? Is there is there perhaps a piece of advice that you might give someone like me, who you're like, no, if you're trying to kind of stand your ground, for lack of better words, that you would advise them to kind of like take that first step?
Yeah. First, I want to ask you, do you find that after you have those experiences where you're like almost fawning,
Hmm.
right? So it's like when you have the reaction responses like fight, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Hmm.
It sounds like you fawn a little bit into like a people pleasing type of scenario.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely a people pleaser.
Do you find that that impacts like other areas of your life? I do think that that's a really great question. I know some of the women listening to this might recognize themselves in what you just said, and then maybe emotionally eat afterwards, and maybe
Yeah.
have it don't make the connection. And so, whether or not that happens to you or not, I do think that what you just described is one of the triggers of emotional eating. And I think that the first step would be to check in with yourself and be like, what how can I be there? Like, what do I need? What do I need to do for myself in this moment? Because I
Hmm.
don't think it's realistic for someone who fawns to be able to immediately give your like, change your personality.
Hmm.
But what I do think is important is to recognize that what happened in that exact moment isn't the only moment.
Hmm.
So
No,
you
that.
have to honor yourself and be like, I fawn, so that means that I get quiet and I am a people pleaser. But the way that you could be there for yourself and not ask yourself to change, which is basically what we were talking about a lot here, where it's not about fixing or whatever, and it's about building another skill
Mhm.
and almost like expanding upon, is to zoom out and be like, okay, I don't need to necessarily change anything that I'm doing in this exact moment, because that's going to be a very hard ask, probably. Over time, it might change as you do what I'm telling you to do now, which would be to, once you acknowledge and you say, okay, that wasn't authentic to what I really wanted to do.
Mhm.
That's the first step. You need to be like, you need to acknowledge that you just abandoned yourself. You don't, and again, not a victim. You don't need to hate on yourself.
Mhm.
You just need to be like, okay, I just abandoned myself. That is not what I really wanted to do. That's the first step. Then, then you need to realize, then you need to say, what did I want and why do I think this is the right thing?
Mhm.
And then you then go in the wild. This is where you go in the wild, right? Because now, if you stopped here, you would be in the intrapersonal situation where you're like, okay, I recognize what I did wrong. I recognize that this is what I want. And then it kind of stays. And it's going to be hard for you to actually change the behavior next time without actually changing the interpersonal piece of it, which would now be, you go to the person and you're like, hey, could I chat with you about something? And you got to say, so like an hour ago, I know we had this conversation and da da da, but like this is really how I feel and this is why.
Mhm.
And so the big shift, and you have to be like, and this is why. And so what do you think? of my idea, like, and you have to like advocate for yourself in this way, and it can be in a really collaborative way. It doesn't have to be in an antagonistic way.
Mhm.
um and I think your nervous system will start to learn that it is safe
Yeah.
to um to speak your mind, even if it is a conflicting opinion. But do you notice how you're starting in an hour range? And as you train your nervous system to get comfortable with that, and they'll be like, oh, okay, this person responded nicely to what I said. In an hour range, your nervous system will start to realize that you can now do it in the moment,
Mhm. Mhm. I
right?
think
But
that's good.
mhm. No, but in the moment might be very difficult to do. So and I think, but the most important thing is that you don't tell yourself that the moment is ended.
Mhm.
You're the one that makes the moment. So the moment could be the moment in the room, that's a minute, and the moment could be a day, right? So when I first started doing this, in my interpersonal relationships, it would sometimes take me 2 days to like get myself together, and I'd have to then reach out to the person and say, and say like, hey, could we talk? And the biggest mindset block that I had to overcome was that the moment was over.
Right.
It wasn't over yet.
Yeah, I think that that's great advice. I think the idea of, telling yourself that the moment's not over, the moment that you kind of make, is huge. I mean, it's also giving yourself the power back to the situation. You're kind of like, I don't like how maybe I reacted in that situation, or I don't like how that ended, or I don't like the what came out of that conversation. That doesn't mean that it's over with or that it can't be changed. It's something that once I sit with what I wanted out of the conversation a little bit more, then I can go back and be like, okay, like let's reapproach this. And I
Right.
think that bleeds into exactly what you're saying. Like these are themes that lead into many different facets of my life, of anybody else's life, down to emotional eating. Like those different things can trigger things like that, or different behaviors like that. So I think that this is, that piece of advice is very insightful in terms of starting from the very top of the iceberg and kind of funneling it down to the different ways that specific experience trickles down into emotional eating, into your romantic relationships, and all those different pockets of life.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, 100%. And in that, and in that vein, it's really important to recognize that even with emotional eating, how and in all circumstances, that our circumstances often feel rigid because we're not willing to expand our own moments of it. A
Yeah.
lot of times binges happen because we're so contracted in this one moment that we think this is how it is, and then it's like it is how it is, but not because this is who you are, but because you didn't expand
Mhm.
the mindset of it all.
Right. It's
Right?
like,
Like you didn't zoom out, right? So yeah, so you had a binge. Doesn't mean now you have to have like that for the next 3 weeks, right? You just have to learn the skill of what we've talked about this whole time, which is to take the feedback of it all. And then when the next urge to binge comes, which might be an hour later, 2 hours later, 4 hours later, you make the different choice and deal with the new emotions,
mhm. Yeah,
right?
that
We can
experience that maybe didn't end as well as you had hoped doesn't have to be the only and the end of that experience. Like there will be another time that you can, whether you create that time for yourself or whether it just happens because that's just the way that life works, um, that you can alter your reaction to it, or your kind of like how you're
exactly.
sitting in that moment. So I think that makes me feel better. You know what I mean? It makes me feel better to be like, oh yes, I am in control of the situation. I'm in control of it. Makes you feel a little bit more in control of your emotions, really, because you're like, okay, if I didn't like my initial emotion, I can be cognizant enough of being like, I didn't like that. which is not something that maybe even in my scenario or even in the binge eating scenario where you're like, I didn't like that, but I don't have to be like that forever. I can be like, let me, now that I know that that's a situation where I feel this way, let me either recreate the situation, not recreate it, but kind of like find myself back in that scenario to be like, oh, wait, I recognize this and I recognize where this went. How can I kind of, be honest with myself and be like, how do I want this to end? How do I want this to
Exactly. And you might have an idea and there might be a way that where it goes perfectly, and odds are it's not going to be perfectly the second
go?
time, the third time, the fourth time. You're just going to keep getting more feedback and more ways to do it. But every time you're calming your nervous system, every time you're polishing, you're polishing the gem every time you do it. And so once you start seeing these experiences as that is how, real long-term sustaining change is made.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I hope that helped and that answered your question. And I'm really happy that we got to chat about this today, because I think talking about how in your environment and how circumstances impact behavior, eating, relationally, all that stuff is so, so important when it comes to just healing and when it comes to living our lives as our highest value selves with like low stress, not so much anxiety, self-care, self-love, self-value, all these things. And yeah, I just love having these conversations with you.
I know, me too. I love knowing and like finding out through these conversations with you too is the idea that these big concepts like this, like they don't have to stay big concepts. Like they really are integrated in those small details of your life. And oftentimes to heal the big picture, it starts with something that you didn't even expect. And then it kind of like funnels into it all. So I love having these conversations because I feel like it's very eye opening to but not only me too, but I feel our listeners too.
Amazing. Well, I'm gonna end the episode for today. I think this is again one of our longer ones.
Yeah.
As always, because our conversations are just so thoughtful and great. But again, I just want to remind listeners that we have a Q&A tab in our show notes, I believe.
Mhm.
You can also send Be Well by AK a DM on Instagram. That's where Lillian sent her question. So feel free to send us messages there. But we love doing these Q&A. Hopefully you guys enjoy it as well. And thank you again so much for listening to another episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped, where we talk about loving food, losing weight sustainably with lasting change. There are lots of free resources on my website for helping you to understand yourself, heal yourself, live your best life. So please go to www.bewellbyak.com. Please subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with anyone you feel might benefit from this empowering knowledge. And until next time, I'm Alana. Thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.